Shalom and welcome to this 41st part of our short Bible study series. And last time we were looking at discouragement. Today I would like to take this further in dealing with discouragement through spiritual warfare. Now let's go back a little bit to Genesis chapter 22 and to the time when Abraham was taking his son up Mount Moriah to be sacrificed. I can well imagine that on that journey up that hill, which I've myself climbed, Satan must have been tempting Abraham like nothing before. You can imagine him, Satan saying, "You quite sure you've heard Yahweh properly? Would he really want you to do such an evil thing? Why? Since, Isaac's the special gift that's been promised to you, why would he want you to destroy him? And why would he have bring him forth so late in life when Sarah was, nearly 100 years old? And he probably would have said, "Well, you're probably getting senile, aren't you, Abraham? You're quite sure you want to go through this." But, and this is the important thing, at the very moment that Abraham was probably struggling with such questions, and it doesn't say in the scriptures that he was, but I wouldn't doubt it, knowing humans of the way we are. What had happened? Yahweh had prepared an alternative. In fact, at the very moment that Abraham was going up the mountain on one side, on the other side, a ram was climbing for his mother, and Yahweh was preparing a way of escape for his servant. So remember that when you're going through a discouraging time and when you're maybe feeling depressed, that Yahweh is always working on the rampart. He's always working on the escape route for you, if you will trust him. Now, obviously, if we're going to withstand all of Satan's assaults, we will do so a lot better if we become wise to his tactics. The old proverb that you should know your enemy well before engaging in battle holds very much in the spiritual realm as it does in the physical. So why don't we go and have a little search through the scriptures and get some insights as to the forces that are operating within and without that are arrayed against us. So we start with the serpent's strategy right at the beginning. And of course, the very, very first thing that the serpent did to our parents was to accuse Yahweh of being a liar. In other words, he tried to get Adam and Eve to contradict Yahweh's davar, his word. And he told Eve and us, his word is not so. So that is the very, very first thing that we need to be aware of. Anyone or anything or any voice which would tell us to contradict the already stated word of God, the davar Elohim, is from Satan. It's one of his tactics. And it was because Eve believed the serpent as opposed to Yahweh's word that the fall came. Long before she ate the apple or the fruit, whatever it was, the fall came when she stopped listening to Yahweh's word and started listening to the enemy. And the enemy, of course, posed as this great benefactor and friend. And the enemy will pose as Yahweh himself in order to get us to disobey and break his word. You can read all about that in chapter 23, verses 2 to 4 of the book of Genesis. So that was the first strategy, to get her to doubt the word and to listen to him. And then the second strategy took it one step further, which was to tell Eve, in effect, that Yahweh's wrong, he's out of the way, he's trying to keep back something good from you. The third trick was to tempt the woman into letting the forbidden fruit play upon her senses. In other words, this is where the flesh gets activated. She put herself in the way of temptation, walked around it, looked at it, smelled it, toyed it, and then finally, of course, took it in Genesis 3, verse 6. There were immediate results to her sin. You see, first of all, Eve wanted fellowship in her disobedience. She still wanted things to be as they were before. She felt at once the sense of isolation that sin brings. Inevitably, when we do wrong, we want to drag other people down with us. And so what did Eve do? She gave the fruit to Adam to eat in verse 6. Second thing, innocence was gone. That is a huge loss when you disobey Yahweh's word. Your innocence goes out the window. And both the man and the woman knew that they were naked, not only in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. In other words, they were uncovered. They were not protected anymore. And the third thing was that they had no desire to fellowship with Yahweh anymore. They ran away from him. In fact, they went and hid themselves from him in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8. Number 4, for the first time they knew fear, in verse 10. And then in 5, they knew what it was to be shamed, what it was to feel shame, in verses 7 to 10. And finally, 6, each blamed his sin on someone else. Adam blamed Eve in verse 12, and Eve blamed the serpent in verse 13. And of course, we are entirely responsible for our own choices and to whom we listen. Now, there were obviously very, very far-reaching consequences and results of this course of action. Firstly, Eve was very much reduced in stature. She was, of course, always in a subordinate position to Adam, but now she was in an even more subordinate position because she had shown herself unreliable. And the second consequence was that in sorrow and pain and difficulty would the process of reproduction take place. And not only that, but the scriptures tell us that the woman would be somewhat of a slave to her sex desire for her husband in verse 16. For man, the result was that he would have to till the ground, which would be very stubborn in producing for him. And if any of you are trying to produce crops, you will know how difficult it can be sometimes. And by means of sweat would Adam get his food. And those of you who are familiar with gardening, or indeed if you're a farmer, you will know just how much hard work is involved in bringing forth the harvest. And then the next thing, the most serious thing, is that death enters life, and to dust you will return. The couple are told in verse 19. Next, Adam and Eve had to wear clothing for the very first time. They had been going around naked up until then. Clothing here representing a perpetual loss of innocence in verse 21, and so it will be until everything is redeemed at the end of time. And then last of all, they are driven out of their paradise, away from the Garden of Eden and from the tree of Chaim, or the tree of life, in verses 23 to 24. All of this is very pertinent to us because whenever we sin, whenever we disobey the word of Yahweh, when we choose to replace it with some other one which we may believe is a revelation from Yahweh, that is what happens to us, without fail. And that is why you need to be very, very, very careful of anyone claiming revelation. And if it contradicts the word of Yahweh in any way, you reject it out of hand. Well, how seriously should we take demons? I know there are plenty of believers who don't believe they exist or think of them as being inconsequential. But there are many believers who think that because they're saved, demons will never trouble them again. How wrong it could be. Well, Yah'shua himself, Jesus, took demons extremely seriously. And when he sent the very first batch of Talmudim, or disciples, on their very first mission, his charge to them was as follows. Number one, they would preach. And second, what? Casting out demons. Mark 3:14 to 15. And that is because demons are always getting in the way of the task of preaching. One thing is very clear, well, actually several things, at least three things are very clear from the text in Mark 3:14 to 15. And that is the demons have recognized these things. Number one, they knew who Yah'shua was. And we can read about that in Mark 1:23 and 34 and 3:11 and 5:7. No mistaking who the Messiah was. Number two, they knew that Yah'shua was against them all the way. And three, they knew that they had to obey him in Mark 1:25 to 28 and 5:12 to 13. Okay, well, Yah'shua had to deal with demons, and in the same way, we have to deal with demons as well. So we need to know how he dealt with them. First of all, he rebuked them. Yahweh rebuke you. And we would do the same. We would say, Yahweh rebuke you in Yahshua's name, Mark 1:25. The second thing that Yahshua did in dealing with demons was that he gave them a direct order in Mark 1:25 and 5:8. And the third thing he did was he charged them not to reveal who he was in Mark 3:12. Now, there are consequences when you start to deal with demons in a direct way like that, as indeed they're supposed to. And the first thing is that those who are troubled by demons or possessed by them or oppressed by them, they will often be buffeted and thrown about. We should not at all be surprised if people do some really weird and crazy things. Mark 1:26. But if we persist, if we operate out of true faith and authority, and you will need to be living a pure life to operate out of authority, the demon, in the case of Yahshua, always obeyed and always departed. Again in Mark 1:26. Demons are everywhere amongst us, and they are multiplying in numbers as the world sins, and particularly as the Messianic community or the church disregards the commandments and starts doing things its own way instead of staying true to the word. Demons will manifest more and more and more in churches and assemblies, and indeed they all are already doing so, sometimes quite spectacularly and very destructively. So going back to the original theme, which was how do we deal with discouragement, and particularly depression, which is often a result of being discouraged. Well, the first thing we've got to do is consider the following. When we rejoice over or look for or repeat with relish negative news, if we enjoy negative news, then we have placed ourselves on the side of evil. That's a telltale sign that something's wrong with our thinking and in our heart life. The second thing is, it is possible to take this negative stance so often with regard to different situations and persons that it becomes a habit or a way of life. And negative thinking is very much a weapon of Satan. Now, you can call it realism if you like, and yes, it's important that we deal with reality. We need to know what's going on with us, but we do not need to embrace it to such an extent that it destroys us. When we embrace reality as an inevitability because we will not have faith in Yahshua, Yahshua calls it not believing in the emet, not believing in the truth. And number three, we do not realize how definitely our mindset, that is what the mind picks out from all the news to highlight. It reveals whose side we're really on. So we should always be focusing on the good news, and specifically the good news of Yahshua, what he is, what he has done, and what he is doing now, and what he can do for you and me in our present situation. You know, even after we've accepted Yahshua and asked him to come and to live with us, Satan will keep trying to persuade us that the flesh is dominant in our lives and must therefore be obeyed. Oh, there's nothing I can do about it. I was born this way, or I was born under these dreadful situations, and people will relive the past as though it was a perpetual prison. It isn't. That is a huge, huge lie. Satan will also feed us the lie that, oh, well, I'm just human. That's human nature, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's a huge lie. No, it's not human at all. To actually be in the flesh is to be anti-human. To be truly human is to be the way or who you were created to be, which is to be a fully free and submitted person in Christ. That is what a human is. So do not say, It's human, it's not, it's anti-human, it's unhuman. Now, the response in every case in the scriptures to Satan's attack is always the same. It is always emunah. It is always faith. When I became Yahshua's servant, when you became Yahshua's servant through trusting in him and obeying his commandments, a series of marvelous things happen. And whether the facts are visible or not at the beginning is immaterial. Things are happening as you walk in faith, even if you do not discern every single detail of the process. The first thing that you do when you're having faith, you're actually accepting the atoning work of Yah'shua for you on the cross. And as soon as you start accepting the atoning work, the work of the cross in your life, you will experience an unshackling from the ascendancy of the flesh over your spirit, as Paul testifies in Romans 8:2. You will experience deliverance simply by trusting, acknowledging, and proclaiming the work of the cross. And Paul says most emphatically and very clearly that when we accept this wonderful liberation by emunah, by faith, and once we begin to actually live it out and incorporate it as part of our lifestyle, we find that the flesh now has to obey the ruach, or the spirit. We discover that Satan has been subdued, he has been overcome, he has been deprived of his power, and again in Romans 8:3 you will see that this is so. You just have to put it to the test. Just live by faith, obey the commandments, trust in the work of the cross, and you will see, as your eyes are towards Yah'shua, as they are fixed on him, you will find yourself becoming a victor. You will find yourself becoming an overcomer. The thing is to make it permanently a reality in your life. It is to make it habitual, so that you don't even think twice about wanting to go back to negativity and a way of depression and of discouragement. Once you realize this very simple truth, and it is incredibly simple, because most of these things happen subconsciously, all that you need to do is to keep your eyes on Yah'shua by holding on to your faith, by keeping your testimony firmly rooted in the work of the cross. Once you realize this, you need only allow the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, to lead you, to lead the way step by step, obedient act by obedient act, just like a conquering general victoriously marching ahead and sweeping over the enemy territory, as we read in Romans 8:9-16. So overcoming depression, overcoming discouragement is really quite simple, and yet it's also difficult because it means that you have got to stop looking at the flesh, looking at all the negativity, looking at defeat as though it's something inevitable, and worst of all, owning it as though it is something natural and human when it's not. It is anti-human, it's anti-natural, it is extremely destructive. Now, I'm not saying deny reality. Absolutely not. We must always be conscious of reality. However, we should not make the real world, which is a world of evil and of faithlessness, of disbelief, of unlovingness, and of negativity, we should not make that our reality by embracing it. You might as well go and embrace a snake. Instead say, yes, this is real, this is what's going on around about me, I'm not denying it, but there is another reality which lives side by side with this world's reality, and I'm embracing that. It is me and I am it. You are acknowledging that Yah'shua is in your life, that you belong to him, that he has power over you, and that you can walk victoriously through life, casting out demons as you are directed by the Ruach, and becoming a true Talmud, a true disciple of Yah'shua. Now, I know it's easy to become discouraged in a world which is now so hostile to Christianity and to the gospel. The Bezorah, the gospel, is more unpopular now than perhaps it ever was, although there have been times in history where, of course, it was persecuted mercilessly. And it is being persecuted again in many countries. It's been resumed in China. It takes place in the Muslim world as a matter of course, and it's already starting here in the West. Get used to that, but walk victoriously and see the miracles multiply in your life, and they shall. Yahweh has not ceased in the way he operated with the first disciples 2,000 years ago. It's the same gifts are available today as they were then. But be careful that you do not go and pick up a false one. The way to do that is to simply live by faith and accept the atoning work of the Messiah. Do these things, and you will become a great, great servant of Yahweh. May he bless your day.